Every business has an ambition. PayPal Open is the platform designed to help you grow into yours. With business loans so you can expand and access to hundreds of millions of PayPal customers worldwide. And your customers can pay all the ways they want with PayPal, Venmo, Pay Later, and all major cards, so you can focus on scaling up. When it's time to get growing, there's one platform for all business. PayPal Open. Grow today at paypalopen.com. Loans subject to approval in available locations.
Success is calling, don't ignore. Take control, unlock the door. Dreams ain't distant, they're right in sight. Sam will help you get it right. He's got the roadmap, got the plan. Covering you, take a stand. Financial peace, a future bright. Sam Nickelbacker shows the light. Call 385-323-2493. Change your life. Now's the time. Build your wealth, make it strong. Leave a legacy that lasts long. He's got the keys, no need to wait. Financial freedom. Yeah.
Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy Show. I'm your host, Sam Knickerbocker, and today we have a special guest from the other side of the country. Tyson is on with us. He is a tax expert. So if you're tired of paying taxes or you're concerned about how the taxes of tariffs are going to actually impact you now and in the future, hopefully not too much in the future. Fingers crossed there. But like what is going on in our world today and how tax season, we are recording this on the 7th of April. And we really only have like a week left. By the time you hear this, you're already late in taxes, just so you know. So hopefully you filed an extension or you got your stuff done and you don't get audited. Those are the pray up to the tax gods. But Ashley, go ahead and just kind of introduce, how did you get into this industry and why are you so passionate about helping people understand taxes?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sam. I appreciate the opportunity to be on. And if you didn't file an extension, then you're not doing it right. Right? It's kind of like if you're not rubbing, you ain't racing. It's like, man, when you're talking about taxes, more than likely you're probably filing an extension if you're in the kind of the big boy game. So I'm an attorney by training. I started out with a big law firm, and after it had sufficiently sucked my soul, I left there and I went in-house. And at the same time that I did that, I started up an impact investing company. And through that impact investing company, learned about some tax ticks and trips and ticks.
He cannot say this. I don't know if he actually learned them or not. Tips and tricks is what he's trying to say.
Tips and tricks. There we go. And say that 3 times fast. And through that process was, really kind of fell in love with, all right, hey, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. And so I did commercial real estate development and did a bunch of stuff in the real estate world until we had the last recession back in 2008. And when that happened, I went back to practicing law. I built up a mergers and acquisition firm where we helped bring Wall Street level sophistication to Main Street America. And as I was doing that, I saw how much money business owners were leaving on the table when they sold their businesses, both in the form of taxes and just lack of planning and lack of intentionality about how they grow their business. So I sold that firm so that I could specifically focus on helping people with mitigating their taxes and making their businesses more valuable. And while I was doing that, I found out about this little program that they created in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 called Opportunity Zones. And I was like, holy cow, that's like 1031, and private equity got married and had a beautiful baby named Opportunity Zones, which I think is the greatest legislatively created tax incentive of our age. And so we popped up a website doing OZs, right, kind of advertising it. And within 2 weeks, we had 150 inbound leads, $75 million worth of capital looking for deals. And we've done nothing but Opportunity Zones ever since. So we're going on literally almost 8 years now.
Awesome. So when you say you're a lawyer, everybody passes the same bar, as I understand it. And then they kind of they choose which one they want to study. And so there's like a natural lack of specialization inside of the lawyer industry educationally, from my understanding. And then the specialization happens after you get your license. Am I misunderstanding anything there?
Yeah, I mean, you could take classes, but what's funny is that, I mean, unless you're getting an LLM, the classes that you take for specialization are kind of moot. And so, yeah,
What's an LLM? What's an LLM?
It's basically a master's in law, and you can get it in tax. You can get it in a number of different things, but it's like a master's degree in law.
So where do you go for all your specialization after you become a lawyer? Is it just like, well, you just read more books because ultimately that's the case law you have to understand?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately you go to continuing legal education seminars. That's where you really kind of get up to speed. And that's where you really hone your craft if you're really diving into a niche. And that's what I did, is that I started hanging out with people that did opportunity zone work. And what's funny is that because there's a lack of kind of, case law, and there's a lack of real input from the IRS, it's basically become kind of what the experts are opining relative to what they think different areas of the tax law are going to have on the effect of opportunity zones. So in effect, we've kind of created the law as we've gone down the road over these last 7 years of general consensus in the industry. And as it gets documented and put out in articles and different publications that people who are the experts are, the positions that they're taking with respect to some of the nuances inside of the play. And so it's hanging out around sharp people, right? And so iron sharpens iron. It's like that sword that you got back behind you. And I've surrounded myself with a bunch of steely, smart individuals and have picked it up from them.
Yeah, I think that's generally true about all things, specifically the law, that interpretation, that we create these laws, we call it the Constitution, and then everything's kind of left up to interpretation by different sects of people. And one thing I tell people is that the IRS really is just like, you get to tell the story, and it's whether they believe you or not. And if they don't, they might come and ask for more. And if you do tell a good story, then you're good. And that's all it is. It's storytelling at its finest. You got to be a great storyteller. And if you have an accountant that doesn't understand storytelling, then they're probably not that great of an accountant. They're probably not actually an accountant or a strategist. They're somebody who is a data inputter, which we all need some good data inputters. I'm not poo-pooing on them. Too bad. But data input is not tax strategy at all. It's just data input. And you don't want somebody to screw that job up either.
There's bookkeepers. Then you got kind of your traditional kind of middle of the road CPAs that are literally kind of like order takers, where they take the information from the bookkeepers, they put it into your tax software. They might identify some low hanging fruit that you can do within the context of trying to reduce your taxes, but they are not tax strategists. Tax strategists are the guys that are saying, okay, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's how you need to reform your structure. Here's how you need to pay this company this. Here's how you need to set up an opportunity zone transaction, defer taxes via capital gains, put it into this area, put your business inside of an opportunity zone. And oh, hey, by the way, in doing that, we're going to set up all of your future growth to be tax-free after you've held it for 10 years.
Yeah.
That's what a tax
strategist does. And I think that's an important aspect of that, is that a tax strategist is generally looking not at the case at hand, but looking multiple years down the road. A typical CPA or somebody who's just going to file your taxes for you, their job is to maximize your tax advantages today, and they don't care about tomorrow. That's not their job in their mind. Their mind is, how do I get you the biggest tax refund? And I fall into this too. Like, I love my tax professional. I'm never going to say anything otherwise. They crush it every year. But as they hire new people, these people who just came out of college and they're just getting their feet wet, which is fine. That a growing firm is going to bring on new people. Don't be scared of the fact that there's new people. But if you say, hey, here's my stuff, here's my P&L, go for it. A novice tax professional is going to try and maximize your write-offs. They're just going to maximize everything down. And sometimes that makes sense for that year to maximize it. Sometimes if you're going for the biggest return, or you need to carry stuff over to make the long-term story make sense, sometimes you don't maximize your write-offs. Sometimes you carry write-offs for the purpose of the story narrative, not necessarily to just pay the least taxes that year. That's not the goal necessarily.
Yeah, I think that that's a bit, that ultimately becomes the thing that tax advisors do. And I think that tax is just one component of aggregate advisory work, because at the end of the day, taxes are the biggest bill you're going to pay in your life. Uncle Sam is your biggest vendor. But there's certain other kind of non-tangibles, right, that you need to make sure that your professionals are aware of within the context of what your ultimate objectives are. So to the point of your podcast, within creating a legacy, that is driven by ultimate, like, okay, hey, what do I want 150 years from now? And so you need to be looking down the road 150 years. And then you got to back into the things that you need to be doing now in order to position it so that you can ultimately accomplish those results. And that's going to be a hybrid of tax mitigation planning. It's going to be your legacy planning within the context of what you're doing with your assets. And then it's also what you're doing inside of your estate planning too, your actual documents, how you're positioning your board of trustees / board of directors, how you're communicating with your advisors so that they can start to build relationships with your progeny so that your progeny gets used to dealing with professionals as well. Because that's the key to preserving wealth, is actually engaging professionals, understanding how to utilize them, understanding how to communicate and how to work with them, and then ultimately, working together as a team in order to accomplish your objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of literacy just as a whole, building that relationship, but understanding, as you mentioned, what that actually looks like. So if we go back to the law, when you graduated as a lawyer, what did you initially choose? Because you said you worked as a lawyer, then you kind of got out of that. What did you initially choose to specialize in the law?
Yeah, so I took what I just said is that I came out in 2000 and, they had spiked starting salaries for lawyers because they couldn't find them. And I started out as a litigator because I love to get up in front of and speak, right? I love
What were you litigating
speaking.
specifically? Was it crime? Was it
commercial
law? Commercial law? Okay.
I went to a big firm, and so I thought that I was going to be, fighting these great battles of, corporations versus corporations, and doing good inside of that. And what it really was it was defending corporations relative to some okay stuff that they had done and some really bad stuff that they had done, and then trying to navigate how you could minimize the impact to the bottom line. And what it really, really was basically fighting on a daily basis with opposing counsel. And, and it was each of us trying to shiv each other in little incremental ways that we could say, oh, okay, this is going to position us to be able to negotiate this the best that we can inside of mediation because I've got some kind of advantage relative to that.
How many people actually, out of those cases you were dealing, how many actually went all the way through versus just made it to a settlement?
Man, I'd say that literally less than 2% actually went to trial. And rightfully so, because trial is a big, man, you want to talk about a wager. You're better off going and putting all your money on red or black at the craps table. Maybe actually an individual number, because the odds are stacked against you if you're going into court. I don't care how good a lawyer you are. It depends so much on what side of the bed the judge woke up on, what the jury pool ends up looking like. And so there's so many different inputs and variables that go into that it's really tough to manage the risk on that. And so you're crazy not to take things into your own hands, mitigate the risk in the context of a settlement, and try to get creative on a third story. That's what we always talked about in the context of coming up with deals, is how can we create a third story that works for both of us?
Yeah. So along that lines, there's so much political unrest. There's so much crap going on all the time in our country. And I'm not for or against, or I'm not pulling any side of this, but I do think it's fascinating that one key contention in America right now is what is the power of the courts and what's the validity of the courts. And I think that it's difficult when you have people who work for the courts, i.e. a lawyer, saying, look, yeah, the court is so unpredictable. Theoretically, you'd think if the law was the law and it was easily interpreted, then it wouldn't be unpredictable gray area. It'd be black and white. But even the lawyers don't trust the law in going into what's right and wrong and having a right and wrong decision passed down. So then they chose to settle outside of going to court because it's a crap. It's literally worse than a craps table. That's a little bit concerning for an average citizen to hear, that not even lawyers would like to go into a trial. They would rather just kind of agree to disagree on the back end, pay the money to whoever gets it, and move on.
Well, I think that obviously if there's a big principle deal, and I believe that our system's the best that the world has ever seen. So don't get me wrong on that. But I think that even within the best that the world has ever seen, that there are issues that people have to be wary of with respect to how that can negatively affect them. And so the wise thing to do is to calculate that risk and then be able to manage through that risk in the form of trying to come up with some kind of settlement. Now, a lot of times you can't do that. Well, particularly when, with what's going on right now in the political environment, is that there is direct interpretation of law that sometimes you can come to a settlement on it, but other times it just has to be interpreted. And then it's got to get kicked up as well. And the reason why it's got to get kicked up and the reason why we have the court system set up the way that we do is so that it minimizes people's perspective and their individual leanings. Back in the day, you didn't necessarily have to worry about that. The rule of law was the rule of law, and it didn't really matter whether it was right or left or progressive or conservative or whatever, right? I mean, you had strict constructionists and, kind of other people that would kind of interpret from there. And that was about the extent of it. And, since I would say that it kind of started with Justice Ginsburg, right, relative to there being this kind of activist, almost legislatively acting from the bench. And, I'm a strict constructionist, and man, that is fair boat for me, right? Like,
so define,
judges
just for the audience, define constructionist so that people understand that
they are obligated to take the rule of law, to take what's happening and what's happened over the course of the rule of law, and then apply that to the current situation at hand. And then ultimately, they're called to put it up against the Constitution as it was written, and through the letters dictating the Federalist letters that were written relating to the Constitutional Convention and the thought process going into that relative to how the court ultimately ends up acting. And that it shouldn't be based upon current and like current state of things relative to pop culture, that's reserved for the constitutional amendment process, that we specifically have a process for how you amend the Constitution. And they thought about that. And so inside of our system, I mean, it's amazing what these guys back, 250 years ago were actually able to do in the context of making something that had a really great base structure, but then was set up so that it could change over time. But that's the key, is that they didn't want things to change quickly. They wanted to change over time. And there's things that need to change, but once again, I'm a firm believer that it shouldn't be changed at the stroke of a judge's pen. It should be changed at the will of the people as, affected by a constitutional amendment.
So I think this term is being used properly, but correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe you'll know what it is, but is it stare decisis or whatever, where basically they
stare decisis,
where they
let the decision stand.
Yeah, basically like, hey, well, they already decided on this, so we're just going to continue to allow this decision to exist. So this kind of gets an interesting, I think that this concept on the one hand works for you and works against you. And this, we're going to turn it back into the tax conversation here for a second. But when you're looking at that from a law perspective, people determined the law and then they made a decision. What's the proper way around that? Or do you think, hey, we should just not ever have that be the case? We shouldn't ever operate off of that rule. Or should we say, no, we should keep that rule in the courts, that if it's already been decided, we just keep with what's already been decided?
So I think that there's obviously, and I think that this is the great thing about the rule of law, is that it allows for interpretation and for different variations of that stare decisis to happen based upon the circumstances of the test, if you will, right? And so it allows for that to happen. I think that the key thing is that when it comes to like big, really big kind of pivots from that, established case law over time, that needs to be handled legislatively. And that's the right. It's like, hey, if you don't like the law, then we need to change that law, as opposed to a judge saying, nope, I don't like that law. I think that it's crap. And you know what? We need to change that now because that one just doesn't apply anymore. Right. I think that that's what I'm talking about. And that's exactly how they talk, by the way. They talk in that voice right there. Yeah. Right.
Well, the reason this is important, I think, especially from a tax perspective, is that's what I'm kind of banking on that stare decisis to continue through. Like, hey, I'm going to set up some precedent. They've already said this can be a write-off. They've already accepted this. They've already accepted certain parts of my narrative in a small scale so that as I'm increasing my wealth, I can increase those things they've already accepted and increase that. So talk a little bit about that while we're doing tax planning or tax structuring. If you're a business and you want to set up the most tax advantages, what's the need to like look at it over a 5 to 10 year strategy and start small with certain things so that it's already baked into the cake and the IRS has already said yes so many times that for them to flip on it wouldn't make sense anymore?
Yeah, and I think that that's the great thing about the rule of law and stare decisis is that the tax court has set things where they've ruled, and if the tax court has ruled, then the IRS isn't going to be able to take a position contrary to that. The other thing is that the IRS cannot take a position contrary to legislation. And so if the legislature enables something, then the IRS cannot take a position contrary to that. Like opportunity zones, those were legislatively created. Now, there's a lot of tax mitigation strategies that are not legislatively created, and there's something that's kind of creatively generated by somebody that sees an opportunity, sees like a window in a provision of the tax code, and then creates a product to take advantage of that window. Conservation easements were an excellent example of that. Is that Congress created the conservation easement for people to be able to preserve property for their heirs and to be able to put it into green space and to get a tax deduction for that. And then some really enterprising folks then said, hey, well, let's take that and then let's go out and let's do a syndication around that. Let's sell that off to the tax investors. And then we can take this property that we bought for $1. We can say it's now worth $100. And then we're going to give that deduction to the tax investors. And that is where you get into problems. And so I think that in the context of that continuum, right? Because all tax strategies are on a continuum. They're either really established in kind of layups, or they're the ones where you're up there sniffing the bars, right? Where you're like, I want to rattle them, right? And, you want to stay, some people like to get aggressive. I'm not a fan of that. And so I want to stay as middle of the road. I want to stay as close to the mountain and as far away from the edge as possible as I'm heading up the tax savings summit. And that's the way that we guide people, is that we're like, hey, listen, let's go for the layups. So I'm a big man. I was 6'8". I played, in the paint all growing up and when I was in college. And man, they love to pound it into the big guys because it's a much more higher percentage shot, taking that shot down low than it is when you're taking them outside. Now, that's not necessarily the strategy anymore, but that was what it was. And so I'm all about the layup. So cost segregation studies, right? Real estate investing because of the depreciation that it gives. And I mean, your standard stuff that you should be doing, like home office deductions, that kind of thing. Maximizing your 401k, doing your catch-up provisions, all of that stuff, man, those are layups that you should absolutely be taking advantage of. And then as your wealth grows and as your taxable income grows, then you should be expanding it out a little bit, getting a little bit more creative as you have more resources to be able to afford to pay professionals to assist you with some of these things that might not be as much of a layup, right?
Yeah. So question about that, because there's two things here. One thing I was told and have been told lots of my life is, slap yourself every time you get a creative thought. Don't get too creative. Financiers and tax people, they can be some of the most creative people. They say you go into a room of 5 tax professionals, give them your taxes, and you can walk out with 10 solutions, right? Because everybody has a different perspective, or 2 or 3. But the other side of that is sometimes it's not necessarily more creative with your tax strategy, although maybe it is, but there's a certain level at which certain tax strategies make sense, because to employ certain tax strategies, there's a cost of setup and there's a cost of management of that setup, right? If you want a certain size of house, right? If you go buy a trailer, it probably doesn't cost that much to heat, cool, electricity, everything. It just doesn't cost that much. So the operating cost of that piece of real estate is far lower. If you want a 1,000 square foot mansion, well, the operating cost of that is more. So it's not necessarily more creative. Yes, you can do more in a 12,000 square foot mansion than you can in a 1,000 square foot trailer home. So you have more space to do things with, but it's not necessarily more creative as much as you now have more resources and you can handle a higher baseline operating cost for your strategy. And if you can't handle the baseline operating cost, then it just means you're not ready to graduate there. Anyways, that's my perspective. I don't want to get confused about using the word creative. It's not like getting closer to the edge of the mountain. Okay. It's
not at all.
You have a wider road because you could carve out more of the mountain and make a wider road. There's a very, very big difference.
That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy.
So I just want to be clear there for anybody listening. Like, none of these strategies are out of reach, right? The law is, as much as we talked about the law being the same for everybody, it's left up to interpretation. But for the most part, Donald Trump is operating off the same tax code as I am. The difference is, what's my resource ability to operate the tax code fully versus the level that I have?
Agreed. And, so I think that inside of that, right, you got to evaluate what your ultimate tax savings are going to be to justify how much that operational cost on that house is going to cost you. So people ask me this all the time. They're like, hey, how are opportunity zones worth it? If I have $100,000 capital gain, does it make sense for me to dump it into an opportunity zone? And my response to them is, hey, listen, it's not about how much gain you have right now, because the deferral on your immediate gain in an opportunity zone program is a rounding error compared to the benefit 10 years out, which is significant. It's an elimination of capital gains taxes on the back end of 10 years. And so it's all about how much it's going to grow to over time. And so if you're doing a real estate deal and you're not expecting it to at least double in 10 years, you need to not be doing that real estate deal. And so on current, and this kind of goes as an illustration about like what the amounts are on current, our rates is that if you've got at least a $250,000 deal and you're going to make at least $250,000, then you're going to ultimately end up saving on taxes on that at 23. Well, let's say that it's $500,000 because that gets you into the 23.8% range. You're going to end up paying around $115,000 in taxes, which over a 10-year period backs into around $10,000 a year of maintenance costs, right? That you could afford to pay. And so that's the calculation that you need to be doing is, okay, is my ultimate tax benefit and savings going to justify the increased operational cost of this house that I'm building in order to get there on the back end?
Well, and that's something that I'm going to bring in two recent podcasts that I've done. One was I think it was the last one that I posted with Chad Terpstra, and he talked about cash value life insurance, right? Cash value life insurance is more expensive up front, hands down. Like, there's no question about it. However, the tax benefits on the back end could make sense for the right person. But again, you've got to have a long runway to make sure that makes sense for you. It's not a 2 to 3 year vehicle. It's a longer vehicle where there's tax benefits applied to that. So I'm curious what your experience of cash value life insurance has been, just really briefly. And then I want to bring up another topic as well, and then maybe see how we squish all this conversation together.
I love whole life insurance, right? Which is what you're talking about. And I love it. I actually am not a fan of like the universal life or anything like that. I love just locked and loaded whole life vanilla, where, you design the policy to be as much, to have as much cash value up front. But I regularly use that myself as where I stash cash, because I'm able to, it's shielded from creditors. It's shielded from taxes on the back end because I can take it out with a loan against it. And then I utilize it as a bank in the meantime. So as I'm going to buy an asset, I will borrow against my life insurance policy, and then I pay that back interest. And I'm making between a point to a point and a half spread on that as I'm doing the infinite banking concept.
Sure.
So I'm a big fan.
Question about this, because there's this, there's life insurance is probably the most, like, so many people have opinions and nobody's educated on it. I don't know, maybe not the most, but it's pretty high up there. So with the contrast, because you mentioned as well, hey, I love whole life, not necessarily the universal side. My opinion, right, as somebody who's worked in the industry for a while, they're for two different clients. And so I'm just curious where you would put this. For somebody who has a large lump sum of cash and they just want the absolute minimum risk and they want to lock in a 4 to 6% rate of return, whole life would make more sense for that person. For somebody who's putting away $200-$300 a month into a whole life policy, does that even make sense at that point?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, right? You're right now, no, it doesn't, because you can make that in a high yield savings account, right? You can make a kind of an equivalent return. But there's a couple reasons why I like whole life and why I hated it when I was coming out.
Sure.
Right?
Everybody hates it until they get rich, and then they're like, oh man, I should have started this years ago. So all the poor people,
exactly.
poor people are like, wait, I don't want this. This is so expensive. I'm like, dude, if you ever want to make any money, you want this. And by the time you're making money, you're going to kick yourself in the butt that you didn't start this when somebody was trying to sell it to you and you thought you were getting screwed.
Yep.
Because you're going to
exactly
miss out
case.
on the surrender charge period. And and the other thing about permanent insurance that a lot of people don't understand, you mentioned the catch-up period in 401ks. The catch-up period in 401ks is like peanuts. It's absolutely nothing compared to the catch-up period in a permanent life insurance policy. You can backfill that sucker for decades if you want. There's no restriction on a backfill from day one of the policy. So even if you underfunded and it wasn't max funded, you can backfill those policies or however many years of backfill space you build up. A 401k, you lose that, or an IRA, you tend to lose those things as soon as the new tax year is over. Yeah. So with the index policies or the universal policies, we'll say in general, I think the argument for those is for, on average, they're getting a better rate of return than a whole life insurance policy on average. That's the argument for it. I'm just curious, as a professional, you're doing this with from the tax side. I was curious what your perspective is. Is the potential gain of 12 to 15% rate of return in a universal policy better than a locked-in lower rate of return in a whole life? And
once again, right? I mean, it's all about risk and it's all about design of the policy and how comfortable you are with that. I've just preferred because of and once again, this goes into your own risk profile. I haven't gone through the recession, and literally my whole life policies were literally the only assets that I had. And a gnarly relationship reorganization that happened around that same time.
That's a nice way of saying that.
Yes, exactly. Right. And it's funny how those tend to coincide with financial difficulties, right? Is that literally was the only asset that I had. I mean, I hated paying into that thing. And then all of a sudden I was like, thank God that guy sold me that policy because it's the only cash that I have right now, right? And so, that's the reason why I like them, is because I've seen the market just completely eliminate, right? And to where there's zero return. So I'm like, listen, this is my slow and steady, my steady Eddie, where it's going to grow over time. I know it's going to dividend. I know it's going to generate, and I don't have to worry about the market. I don't have to worry about ups. I don't have to worry about downs. I don't have to worry about anything. I just stick it in there and it grows. Yeah. That's for me.
Yeah, no, right now there's a lot of, even on the index side, that are like 4.5%, 5% fixed, like guaranteed on them. So you're basically a whole life, but you still get options to grow as well. Anyways, enough of that.
To get up? Yeah.
Yeah. So
once again, right? So this is the reason why you come and you talk to somebody that's a professional, right? And you go and you learn about this stuff, because I didn't know that there was a product out there like that.
It's insane. What's on the market now is cool, but let's talk about, I want to add one other caveat, and then I want to pivot this whole conversation into tariffs. Okay. So because I think that this other guest I had, her name's Sally Gimmon, and she is all about spendthrift trusts, like taking and making sure that you're setting up multi-generational, not something like a family living trust that is basically dead once you die or dismantled once you die, but something that's going to be a longer spendthrift trust. So when she was on, she was like, some CPAs like them, some CPAs don't think they really work. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, what is the benefit of a spendthrift trust over maybe some other trusts?
Well, I mean, spendthrift, what she's talking about, that's actually a provision in a trust, right? And so every single trust is going to have a spendthrift clause. And that effectively makes it so that, if the beneficiary has creditors or that kind of thing, that the trustees have the discretion to not make distributions to that person. And that's what protects it from creditors. And I think that that's incredibly important. That's the whole reason why you have a trust.
Yeah, maybe more specifically, she's talking about using these in a way to set them up like a beneficial ownership type thing, where she's, in her mind, this is, again, her words, you can go listen to the whole podcast. I'm not going to relitigate that whole thing right now. But in her mind, once assets are moved into that trust, then essentially you're eliminating a lot of taxation. And her claim, again, I'm not promoting this. I'm not saying it's accurate. I'm just saying this is her claim, that by doing so, you'd eliminate about 92% of your taxation by moving assets and moving your kind of life under this trust, like the Rockefellers did, rather than leaving it out exposed just in a normal Social Security number or EIN number.
Sure. No. So you are definitely protecting it that way, right? So by shifting it over into a vehicle like that, it makes it so that it protects it from claims of creditors. And it's also going to make it so that you can fall under the lifetime exemption, which most people are going to be under the lifetime exemption amount. And for the people that are over that, it's really important that they do it because you want to take advantage of discounting and that kind of thing inside of your estate plan. You want to free.
Define lifetime exemption. Again, I know what these terms mean, but a lot of our audience, this is so over their head, but it shouldn't be. I think this is basic, in my opinion, this is basic financial education. People need to know this because if you don't, this is like rule 72. If you by the time you're 65, let's say you're 25, 30 years old right now. If you're by the time you're 65, you have $10 million in assets, and you pull about 4% out a year, that's $400,000. But after affected by inflation, that's really about $100,000 a year lifestyle right now. This isn't a great lifestyle. 100 grand is like, it's an okay lifestyle. So if you don't have $10 million by the time you're 65, you're probably living a lower lifestyle than you are today in a draw on your assets. And so when we're talking about these lifetime exemptions, some people are like, oh, it's never going to happen. Nobody's going to be over them. My hope is that everybody's over that, or that number gets adjusted every year. But talk about a lifetime exemption.
It does get adjusted. Well, it does under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, but we don't know if that's going to get extended or not. What Congress said is that if your estate, your net taxable estate is under, and the amount right now is like 14 million and some change. I think that at the time it was like $10 million, and then it adjusted for inflation back in 2017. Now that number's at 14 million. And so it does adjust for inflation year over year. And that's per person. So for a married couple, it's around $28 million in the aggregate. And if you're underneath that amount, you don't have to worry about federal estate taxes. Now, there's state estate taxes, and there's some other things that you do need to be concerned about. But generally, if you're under that amount, you don't have to worry about federal taxes. And so if you're over that amount, you have to write the government, the IRS, a check for 40% within 180 days of day of death. If you're anywhere approaching that lifetime exemption amount, then you need to be very, very intentional about doing your estate plan and making sure that you have life insurance proceeds that will pay out in order to be able to write that 40% check to the government. And so that's what we talk about within the context of the lifetime exemption. And you can freeze your estate value by putting it into, and it's not a spendthrift trust, it's an irrevocable trust for purposes of the IRS. And there's different provisions that you can do inside of that can make it so that it freezes the estate value as it goes into that trust. Because you can have a spendthrift trust that is irrevocable for purposes of the IRS that freeze your estate value, but still go on your 1040. And that's the challenge within this whole conversation about trusts and estates, is that you don't necessarily want to use a pure irrevocable trust because that's going to get taxed at the highest amount for income purposes. And so you want some kind of trust that allows you to freeze the estate value, but then allows you to report it on your 1040 for income purposes, like a SLAT, like a spousal lifetime access trust, like a beneficiary defective inheritance trust, or like an IDGIT, a intentionally defective grantor trust. That gives you the benefit of freezing the estate value. It gives you that spendthrift provision, but it allows you to report it on your 1040 for income tax purposes.
Yeah, I love it. So masterclass in trust so far.
Man, we just hit it. That was like the 90-second trust masterclass.
I know,
right?
I know. The truth is there's so much in here, but to get educated, you got to learn. You're not going to learn it all from a podcast. You're not going to learn it all from a book. It takes study. It takes application. I mean, I have clients that I work with, and I work with, and years later, they're like, what do we even do? Do I like this? And you have to re-explain what the strategy was because it's a multi-year strategy. And once they get it, they're like, let's get
that's right. Yeah.
Let's get into the tariff conversation, because the tariff conversation, I think it's a lot of people don't understand who gets the taxes in a tariff. Not who gets the taxes, but who gets hit the hardest in a tariff, in this trade war that we're in right now. Who's getting hit the hardest, or who's going to get hit the hardest if it continues? The consumer, the business owner, the governments. Like what's the long-term effects from your perspective? What's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, and that's a really tough one, right? Because it is all so individually specific relative to the individual tariff that's happening. And, because and it's funny because our country and the the whole basis for kind of freedom of transition and that kind of thing was to encourage global trade, namely for people to be able to buy our stuff, right, back in the day. But what that did is it set the stage for these other countries to be able to then take our jobs, right, to suck our stuff out of the economy. So the Southeast is a perfect example of that, right? That the tariffs came down and then people are like, man, why am I paying people in South Carolina to knit this shirt when I could take it over? I could take all of this equipment and I could take it over to China or to Vietnam or to Thailand. And man, I can get, labor for literally pennies on the dollar. It's actually fractions of pennies on the dollar. And so that then happened. And because there wasn't any tariff, or the tariffs were really low relative to some of that stuff, it was like, hey, we might as well do that. And so as a result, right, like we became this kind of multinational economy where people are like inside of the supply chain, they were reliant upon those cheaper prices that were coming as it related to being able to use that cheaper labor overseas. Now, there's a massive economic question about who ultimately pays for that, right? I mean, at its core, that results in maybe a little bit of a less price, right? So at Walmart, when you go to get your toothpaste or when you go to get that t-shirt now, right? Maybe it's $8 and as opposed to 15, right? But there's a huge debate about who ultimately is paying for that. And is it ultimately affecting our economy downstream or not? And I mean, I'm not going to profess to be an economist to be able to tell you one way or another, right? That, oh no, that's this tariff thing that Trump's doing is, that's ultimately going to benefit us, right? Because I think that we're seeing, right, that the markets really don't think that it's beneficial, right? I mean, it's roiling the markets right now.
Sure, which neither of us are concerned about because we know where our money is and we don't care about down markets. So that's the funny thing. Is right? Like if you do it right, then the down market is a time to go out of insurance oftentimes and into the market because that's its low point. But
everything's on sale.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's beautiful. So question though, or not really a question, but I want to just talk about this a little bit because we use terms in America that maybe from a professional perspective, we know what we're talking about, but then, and it's easier to say it this way, but then to the lay person, they feel like it's wrong. Now, I'm not dismissing in this statement that there is slave labor happening in America. Probably in America too, but definitely in other countries. There's slave labor. So I'm not dismissing the fact that there are real issues. Also, cheap labor, the term cheap labor isn't necessarily meaning always that we're using that there's slave labor happening. In other countries, the dollar is worth a lot more there than
sure.
Like if you go to the Philippines, you could pay somebody $5 a day. And that's I don't know, $5 a day, but $5 an hour for sure. And that's a great living for them.
Like they're probably the highest paid person in their village.
More than their doctors, more than their lawyers, more than anybody else. And so sometimes if you give too much money to an economy that actually doesn't exist that way, it actually disrupts their economy. So paying them more wouldn't work. Like it wouldn't actually solve the issue. So don't feel like anybody's taking advantage of another population by not paying them what we get paid in America. The standard of living is different. Just like the difference between if you go to Missouri or you live in California, there's the pay discrepancy in those two places inside of America is wild, right? Because of the cost of living in the area. So just keep that in mind that term that we're using as far as cheap labor, it's not abusive labor all the time. Even though sometimes it is. I'm not dismissing
we're not discounting that happens, sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's an important perspective there. So when you're helping your clients, how much have you seen in the last, it's really only been like 2 weeks, but these opportunity zones that were carved out in the 2017 tax code, how much do you see those being impacted, positive or negative, during this current market correction?
So, it's like we're talking generally about real estate and we're talking generally about kind of businesses as a whole. And so the opportunity zones themselves are really not being impacted that much by the tariff conversation. It's more the individual businesses. And what's interesting is that, like, as it relates to my clients, most of my folks have been in some kind of onshoring type arrangement. So I've got a client that is in the business of manufacturing solar panels. And this has been a massive boondoggle for them, right? Because now people are like, man, we need to get our solar panels made domestically. And so as a result, it spiked the need for what they're doing. I've got another manufacturing client, and man, their orders have spiked through the roof because people are concerned about tariffs. And they're like, man, we need to start looking to try and secure domestic based, manufacturers. And so what's funny is that this tariff conversation has actually resulted in lots of positive activity for the folks that I've been dealing with who are in the opportunity zones, who are specifically taking businesses or they're starting businesses in these historically underinvested areas that are creating jobs, they're creating wealth, they're creating things happening inside of these communities where it wasn't before. And now all of a sudden there's this this kind of nationwide focus on, hey, we need to get a hold of some of those people because we need their stuff. And so, I mean, and once again, right, I'm not proponent of like how it's happening or anything like that, but I think that at a certain point, and whether you love him or whether you hate him, I think that Donald Trump has through some of the things that he's been able to accomplish, right? You got to argue that guy is crazy like a fox sometimes, and that he's operating and he's doing some things that might look really bad, or it might look to the general person to be like, oh my goodness, this is going to have this massive negative effect on me, right? And then once it plays out and once it shakes out, you're like, oh wow, you know what? That actually ended up being a pretty good move. But I mean, I think that part of the challenge within America today is that there's so much vitriol associated with just him being Donald Trump, and there being this like argumentative type deal. And he feeds directly into that, right? Because he knows that that's like what is happening in America right now, that people can't be like, oh yeah, you know what? This policy was actually decent. It's kind of like opportunity zones. They were not his initiative. They were not his legislation. They were introduced and they were a product of the Clinton administration. Barack Obama tried to get them through. Donald Trump just happened to be the guy whose watch they came out on. And he did a great job of, using PR around him. But then the left was like, right, like all these liberal news outlets were like, man, opportunity zones are the worst, right? They're just a method for the rich to get richer. And dude, I've got story after story after story where it's positive impact on the people that are supposedly the people that they're looking out for. And they're like, oh, well, no, we don't care about that. This is a plan for the rich to get richer. Well, yeah, they're going to, they're going to save money on taxes, but they're positively impacting people's lives. And it's not costing the taxpayers a massive amount of money in this ridiculously complicated program. Instead, it's an easy-to-use program that brings private capital to help these situations out. That's the best kind.
Yeah. And what I think is really funny about when you're talking about how people are portrayed in the media versus like how people portray in the media what's going on around them and who they're actually looking out for, most of the people are having a positive impact in general. And there's a few people at the top that are making money. What doesn't get talked about, I don't think near enough, is there's a lack. I think sometimes in society, there's a lack of personal responsibility and personal accountability for their life in general. And so this is just a funny statistic that people should be aware of. There's more dollars on the system loaned out from the Federal Reserve than ever before in human history. And 2020 made about 3 times more money than ever had been printed ever. So if you go look and see like how much money was printed from the day of the dollar starting to 2020, and then how much money got printed through COVID and Joe Biden and and so on, about tripled the money supply, which means there's more dollars out in circulation than ever before. So if you don't have more dollars in your bank account, it is not their fault. They printed more just for you. You suck at acquiring them. That's the only truth there is. Okay? You suck at acquiring the dollars because they tripled the money supply, right? What if they just came out, there was 1 pie and there wasn't enough for everybody, and then they brought 3 more pies. Now there should be plenty of pie for everybody. If you forget to get up and take a piece of pie and put it on your plate, that is your problem. You're expecting somebody to serve you on a golden platter. That's not how it works. The people who are used to getting and acquiring and producing value in society, they're the ones who end up acquiring more of the pie. Not because there's less pie to acquire. There's 3 times as much pie to acquire. You just suck at acquiring it. That's my opinion on people who don't have enough money in their bank account. It's a personal choice of habits, mindsets, and behaviors.
Sure.
And if you want ideas of how to acquire more of those things. Talk about the opportunity zones. Let's say somebody doesn't have tons of money. They're just maybe interested in learning about them, how they could get engaged in some of these opportunity zones. What's something that if they have no money in their bank account, where could they go and profit through an opportunity zone, even if they are not the ones with the asset rich or the money?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we've got people doing on a regular basis is they're starting businesses, right? And they're starting them in an opportunity zone. If you're starting a business and you think that business is going to grow and to significantly grow, you're crazy not to start it in an opportunity zone.
So define an opportunity zone in that context. Like what's a list of sectors that somebody might be like, you know what, could I do that? Would I be okay doing that?
Yes. Opportunity zones were created by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and what it allowed the governors to do was to designate up to 25% of their low-income census tracts as OZs. And so they're designated, they're on a map. You can go to ozpros.com/map, and you can look up and you can find all 8,738 of them, I think is how much there are. There's 8,700 roughly. And they're in every state, every territory, like 98% of the island of Puerto Rico is an opportunity zone. And so if you find that zone, then you can start a business in that zone. And as long as you're leasing property, right? So you got to have a lease. So you got to have a place of business. You don't have to buy property. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. You can lease property. You start up a business. You start it with some kind of capital gain. When you start your business through an opportunity fund, then the next 10 years worth of growth, actually all the way up until 2047, is going to come out tax-free to you. And it's also going to enable you to go to other opportunity funds where people are trying to defer taxes, and they can invest into your business, and then their growth of their investment is going to come out tax-free as well. So it opens up a whole nother capital source, and it tees it up for the founder to come out and to exit their business tax-free.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful, and it's so simple that if you just knew where to start a business, what type of business to start, you could be really leveraging your power in the marketplace. But so many people forget to do research or forget to ask an expert on how to do that appropriately. And so then they end up not doing it. Let's say, just hypothetically, there's a mom and pop shop that is in the opportunity zone geographic location and they are trying to sell, and I want to buy that business but start a new EIN number. Does that count, or is that not?
Absolutely.
I figured it would. I just want to be clear that it's not, you don't have to start the new wheel. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You can start the new EIN number and purchase the wheel that's already producing, and the next 10 years are profit free.
Yeah. And then you could also, it doesn't have to be limited by that specific zone. You could find a business that's outside of the zone. You could go lease a place that's inside of the zone, move the business into that zone, and now the next 10 years come out tax-free.
So question about moving the business. Do you have to legally move the physical premise of the business, or do you just have to move the billing address and operation management side, like registered address, into the zone, but still operate outside the zone?
No, so you have to have at least, so the way that test happens, there's 5 tests for opportunity zone businesses. The first one is your assets, that 70% of your tangible assets need to be inside of a zone. Now that can be a lease, so that lease can count towards that. And that's how we solve a lot of the problems with that test. But the second test is that 50% of your gross income needs to come from a trade or business happening inside of the zone. And so that's tested by where your employees or independent contractors are actually working. And as long as they're working from a zone, at least 50% of the time, then you're okay. Or if you have employees that kind of go outside of the zone, the example that they use in the regs is like a lawn care business. You're not going to just be cutting lawns in the side of the zone. But as long as your employees come back to the zone on a regular basis and they're supervised by somebody who's there daily, then that will work too.
Okay. No, I love it. I love these, these are the nitty gritty things that, everything sounds good on its face. It's a nice golden wrapper. And then you do need to be aware of the specifics. So you don't go and set something up thinking you did it okay, and you did it half-assed. And then you have a big tax problem on your hand that you weren't expecting, or just a big litigational problem on your hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Any unmet expectation is just not fun. Why not just start with the right information, pay for the right information so that you have access to it in its true and proper form. So I think that's incredible. Well, I appreciate you. Any final words, Ashley? Where would somebody go to get a hold of you if they wanted to sit down and just explore what opportunity zones they could do? Obviously, you could go to OZ. Sorry, I forgot the.
It's ozpros.com.
So they could go there.
And if they go to ozpros.com/podcast, we've got specials in there. We've got masterclasses available for realtors, for folks that have appreciated cryptocurrency. Well, or for folks who had appreciated stock.
Dude, I had somebody who was like, I'm going to wait till April because that's going to be based on the Bitcoin cycle, it's going to be the highest in April. And it hit 100 or whatever. And they're like, I'm going to wait till April. I think it's going to. Dude, they should not have waited till April.
I sold a Bitcoin back I needed to wait till the next year so that way it started in 2025 tax year. But I sold it like on January 3rd. It was like at 107. Man, like as I went to sell it, I just was watching the price go down. And I was like, man, get it sold. And so,
Good for you.
So OZ Pros, and so I'm taking that capital gain on that. I'm putting it into an opportunity fund. I'm deferring that tax until 2027, maybe even 2029 based upon legislation. And then I'm putting that money to work in an opportunity zone. And now the growth of that's going to come out tax free for me. And just so happens that one of the things that I invest in is it's a crypto mining. It's a green data center that's inside of an opportunity zone that happens to do a little bit of crypto mining. Got all kinds of different investments that you can look at. If you go to ozpros.com, we'd be happy to have a conversation. We've got lots of resources that are available on that site, and folks can kind of generally see and mess around to see if this might be something that's worth looking at for them.
I love that. Hey, thank you so much. And this has been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation so much. I'm grateful for you having it. Hopefully you guys learned something. If you did, please share this out. You're going to see reels. You're going to see all this social media stuff come out on this, but share the podcast, rank the podcast, put 5 stars on it, leave a review, make sure that other people see this because of the time where this is coming out right now in America. People need to understand tax strategy. They need to understand how these decisions are impacting them and how they can get ahead. Even in what seem uncertain times, the most opportunity and the most millionaires are created in down markets. Now's your time. Now's your opportunity. Don't wait. Find a way for you to win out of this opportunity. That being said, we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show.
Call now, don't hesitate. 385-323-2493. Change your fate. A legacy in motion once you go.
Every business has an ambition. PayPal Open is the platform designed to help you grow into yours. With business loans so you can expand and access to hundreds of millions of PayPal customers worldwide. And your customers can pay all the ways they want with PayPal, Venmo, Pay Later, and all major cards, so you can focus on scaling up. When it's time to get growing, there's one platform for all business. PayPal Open. Grow today at paypalopen.com. Loans subject to approval in available locations.